Every apocalypse in fiction starts with one person doing something stupid. But here's the thing, some of those mistakes are genuinely unforgivable, and others are so understandable you'd probably make them yourself. Today I'm ranking every single mistake that caused a zombie apocalypse in fiction, from the most innocent to the most criminally negligent, and we're starting with the one that's hardest to blame anyone for. Slicing open the xenomorph egg. In 2122, Executive Officer Kane descends into a chamber underneath a derelict alien spacecraft on LV-426, and what he finds is hundreds of leathery, egg-shaped structures sitting there in the dark. One of them starts to open, and Kane, being a human being with functioning curiosity, leans in to get a closer look. That's it. That's the mistake. A facehugger launches out, latches onto his face, wraps a tail around his neck, and shoves a tube down his throat. The crew haul Kane back to the ship, try to remove it, and discover its blood is molecular acid that eats through multiple decks. Eventually, the facehugger detaches on its own and dies. Kane wakes up, seems fine, sits down for dinner. Then a chestburster punches through his ribcage mid-bite and disappears into the ventilation system. The facehugger's entire job is to keep the host alive long enough to implant an embryo, then fall off and die, which makes it look like the problem solved itself. It didn't. Hours later, a fully grown xenomorph is stalking corridors, picking off crew members one by one until only Ripley survives by blowing the entire Nostromo to pieces. Now here's where it gets complicated. Weyland-Yutani, the corporation that owns the ship, had secretly programmed the onboard computer to prioritize recovering the alien over crew safety. The crew were expendable, so there's institutional negligence baked into this from the start. But the physical moment that triggers everything is Kane leaning over that egg. And honestly, I don't know what to tell you. He's never seen anything like this. There's no warning sign in any human language. The egg looks completely inert until it senses a warm body nearby. The horror is the mismatch between everything humans know about biology and how this thing actually works. On Earth, dormant means dormant. An egg sitting still is just an egg. The xenomorph egg violates every assumption about parasitism a human could reasonably hold. It wakes up because you're near it. It keeps you alive so it can use your chest as a nursery. Then it kills you over dinner. Kane's mistake is negligent only in hindsight. With zero context and zero precedent, curiosity is the only logical response. A man doing exactly what explorers do, in the worst possible place to do it. But if you think curiosity killing one ship's crew is bad, wait until you see what happens when an entire corporation builds a secret lab underneath a mansion and fills it with weaponized viruses. The T-Virus lab accident. Here's the thing about Umbrella Corporation. They built a secret bioweapons laboratory underneath a mansion with civilian access, in the mountains outside a mid-sized American city. And then they filled it with experimental viruses, mutant animals, and a sentient leech colony, which is, not ideal. On May 11th, 1998, researchers at the Arklay Laboratory were performing deep surgery on the T-002 Tyrant, one of Umbrella's crown jewel bioweapons. The Tyrant had a special organ designed to aerosolize the Epsilon strain of the T-virus on the battlefield. Think of it like a biological gas grenade built into the creature's body. Great for warfare. Terrible for the enclosed underground facility where you're currently cutting the thing open. But the surgery alone didn't cause the outbreak. That honor belongs to the Queen Leech, a colony of leeches that Umbrella had previously exposed to the progenitor virus as part of an earlier experiment. The leeches became self-aware. Let me say that again. Umbrella created a sentient parasite and then just kept it around. The Queen Leech interfered with the surgical procedure, triggering the release of Epsilon from the Tyrant's organ, and suddenly the lab's entire air handling system became an infection vector. Before you dismiss this as bad luck, consider the design choices that made it possible. Umbrella engineered a creature with an organ specifically built to spray virus into the air, and then they housed it in an underground lab connected to a ventilation network. That's not an unforeseeable accident. That's putting a loaded gun inside a wind tunnel and acting surprised when someone gets shot. The Epsilon strain tore through the facility. Nearly every researcher in the lab, dead. The test subjects, dead. Hikers in the Arklay Mountains who stumbled too close, dead. STRS members sent to investigate the disappearances, also dead. The body count between May and July 1998 was staggering, and that's just the Arklay incident. The virus eventually leaked into Raccoon City's water supply, leading to the full urban outbreak and the government-authorized missile strike that wiped the city off the map entirely. And the Queen Leech? Umbrella's own creation, a sentient byproduct of their earlier unethical research that exploited their overconfidence and turned their most advanced experiment into a mass casualty event. They built the monster that sabotaged the bigger monster. There's a poetry to it. Honestly, this sits above Kane's mistake on our negligence scale for one simple reason. Kane didn't know what he was looking at. Umbrella knew knew exactly what they had. They knew the T-virus was lethal, they knew the tyrant could aerosolize it, and they knew the Queen Leech was behaving unpredictably. They just didn't care enough to stop. But if you think one underground lab losing containment sounds bad, wait until you hear about what happens when well-meaning activists decide to open some cages, releasing the infected chimpanzees. Here's the thing about most apocalypses in fiction. They're caused by evil corporations, shadowy military programs, or mad scientists with god complexes. The rage virus outbreak in 28 Days Later is caused by people who love animals, which is, not ideal. 3 members of the Animal Freedom Front break into the Cambridge Primate Research Center one night with one goal: free the chimpanzees. And honestly, their hearts are in the right place. These chimps are visibly distressed, strapped to chairs, forced to watch screens full of violence on loop. It looks like torture because it basically is torture. The researchers are using Ebola as a delivery vector for a neurochemical inhibitor meant to suppress violent behavior, except the virus mutated and started doing the exact opposite. Instead of calming rage, it amplifies it. The chimps aren't distressed because they're sad. They're distressed because they're barely contained biological weapons. A scientist discovers the break-in and does something remarkably rare in horror fiction. He gives a clear, specific, unambiguous warning. He tells the activists the chimpanzees are infected with rage. He names the pathogen. He explains the danger. He practically begs them to stop. They open the cage anyway. Compare this to Kane leaning over the xenomorph egg. Kane had zero context, no warning label, no scientist screaming at him. These activists have a terrified researcher standing in front of them spelling out exactly what will happen, and they dismiss him, because to them, he's not a concerned scientist, he's the guy torturing animals. Why would they believe a word he says? The freed chimp bites an activist within seconds. She converts in roughly 10 to 20 seconds. Not minutes. Seconds. She starts vomiting blood and attacking her colleagues, who also convert almost immediately. The lab goes from a liberation mission to ground zero of a national extinction event in under a minute. The rage virus is nightmarishly efficient, bloodborne, transmitted through bites or a single drop, hitting your eyes or mouth. Hosts don't shamble. They don't rot. They run at you with every ounce of strength their body has, fueled by nothing except the neurological need to destroy whatever is in front of them. Within 28 days, mainland Britain is done. NATO declares the entire island an unconditional isolation zone. No evacuations, no aid, just quarantine, and the assumption everyone inside will eventually starve. But here's where it gets complicated. Without the Cambridge researchers running deeply unethical experiments using Ebola as a genetic delivery system on living primates, the rage virus simply doesn't exist. The research is the first domino. The activists are the second. Both are necessary. Neither is sufficient alone. The negligence here is willful in a way that Kane's curiosity never was. Kane didn't know. These activists were told, explicitly, by someone who understood exactly what was at stake, and they decided their ideology mattered more than his expertise, which, in fairness, is a very human thing to do. People dismiss experts they distrust every single day. It just doesn't usually end with NATO writing off an entire country. But if you think one country collapsing in under a month is fast, wait until you hear about a train ride in South Korea where it took approximately one afternoon. Overlooking. Patient Zero. Train to Busan is a film about a lot of things. Fatherhood, sacrifice, class warfare, and the way people turn on each other when survival is on the line. But before any of that, it's about one woman getting on a train, and nobody stopping her. Here's the setup. The film opens with hints that something is already going wrong across South Korea. A truck driver near a quarantine zone hits a deer. He leaves. The deer stands back up, visibly wrong, eyes milky, limbs twitching in ways that shouldn't be possible. Whatever's happening isn't contained. It's already out. But we don't follow the deer. We follow Seok Woo, a fund manager in Seoul. Successful, emotionally distant, great at making money, terrible at being a father. His daughter Suan wants to visit her mother in Busan for her birthday. He barely remembers the birthday. He buys her a gift she already has. This is a man so disconnected from the people around him that he can't even see what's right in front of his face, which becomes a rather loaded metaphor for everything that follows. Because the real mistake, the one that turns a regional crisis into a trainload of carnage, happens on a platform at Seoul Station. Reports of riots are already filtering through the news. Something is clearly wrong, and yet a visibly distressed, clearly injured young woman stumbles onto the KDX high-speed train moments before the doors close. Nobody stops her. A train attendant notices something off but doesn't act fast enough. Nobody connects the shaking, bite-wounded woman to the emergency alerts playing on screens throughout the station. She collapses in a vestibule vestibule. Then she turns. The infection spreads through bites. And here's the terrifying part. Transformation is fast. A single carrier in an enclosed space becomes an unstoppable chain reaction. One woman becomes 2 infected. 2 becomes 10. 10 becomes an entire train car. Within minutes, the KTX transforms from public transportation into a 300-kilometer-per-hour coffin hurtling through a country that's falling apart around it. Every station they try to stop at is already overrun or barricaded. Dijon, their first major stop, is supposed to have military quarantine support. It doesn't. The soldiers are already turned. Safe zones announced over official broadcasts are lies by the time the train arrives. What makes this scenario so effective is how the failure operates at multiple scales simultaneously. The opening deer tells us containment already failed before the story begins. Official channels fail to warn people in time. And on the train, that single woman is patient zero for every passenger aboard. Basic human inattention led it onto a sealed tube moving at high speed. Every level of prevention, from government response to a single train attendant's hesitation, broke down in sequence. Institutional failure and individual failure, working in perfect, horrible harmony. But if a single stowaway on a train can turn a commute into a death sentence in minutes, wait until you hear about the outbreak that starts because someone opens a door they were explicitly told to keep shut. The trioxin leak. Here's the thing about most zombie apocalypses. Somebody makes a mistake, things get bad, and then humanity figures out how to fight back. Shoot them in the head, burn the bodies, quarantine the area. There's always a playbook, but 2,4,5-trioxin doesn't care about your playbook. Trioxin makes the playbook actively worse. Let me explain. Darrow Chemical developed trioxin for the US military as a herbicidal gas, basically a souped-up cousin of Agent Orange. During early testing at a Veterans Administration morgue in Pennsylvania, the gas accidentally leaked and reanimated corpses. Full, conscious, screaming reanimation. The military's response was to seal the zombified bodies inside heavy steel drums along with the residual gas, then somehow route those drums into commercial shipping channels, like they were surplus filing cabinets. The drums ended up in the basement of the UNITA Medical Supply Warehouse in Louisville, Kentucky, staffed by civilians who had zero clearance and zero understanding of what was sitting 10 feet below them. On July 3, 1984, warehouse foreman Frank is showing new employee Freddie around the basement. He brags about how well built the drums are, and to prove it, he kicks one. The seal ruptures. Frank's kick is undeniably stupid, but he's the last domino in a chain that was always going to fall. The military developed a gas that reanimates the dead, couldn't destroy the results, covered the whole thing up, and shipped the evidence to a random warehouse in Kentucky with no special handling instructions. Frank is reckless, but the system failed long before he did. The gas escapes and reanimates every preserved specimen in the warehouse. Frank and Freddie both inhale it. Their bodies begin dying slowly while their consciousness remains fully intact, which is, not ideal. But the real catastrophe hasn't started yet. When a contaminated cadaver gets incinerated at a nearby crematorium, the burning trioxin fumes rise into the atmosphere, condense in the clouds, and fall back down as acid rain directly over an adjacent cemetery. Every buried corpse reanimates, hundreds of them, clawing out of the ground, hungry and screaming, and here's where trioxin becomes the single most terrifying zombie agent in fiction. These things cannot be stopped. Destroying the brain does nothing. Dismemberment does nothing. You cut one in half, and now you have 2 problems. Severed limbs keep moving independently. They can speak. They can strategize. They can use radios. And they specifically crave human brains because they say it's the only thing that dulls the agony of being dead. Every containment strategy makes trioxin worse. Burn them? The smoke creates more contaminated rain. Nuke the site? Congratulations. You just aerosolized trioxin across an entire region. The military actually does nuke Louisville at the end, and the final shot is more acid rain falling on a wider area. The solution is the problem. George Romero's Night of the Living Dead exists in this universe as a movie, and Frank literally tells Freddy that Romero got the details wrong. The real zombies can't be killed by brain destruction. That was Hollywood fantasy. The truth is worse, and speaking of contaminated products entering the food supply without anyone knowing, at least trioxin required physical proximity to a leaking drum. The next outbreak spread through something people ate for breakfast, distributing the cordyceps flower. Every other zombie apocalypse on this list requires proximity. You need to be near a lab, near a chimp, near a barrel of military chemicals. The cordyceps outbreak in The Last of Us requires you to eat breakfast. That's it. That's the entire vector. Toast, cereal, a biscuit from your neighbor. Millions of people didn't get infected because they wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. They got infected because they woke up on a Tuesday and had pancakes. Here's how it happened. In 2003, a mutated strain of Ophiocordyceps, the fungus that normally turns ants into mindless puppets, adapts to survive at human body temperatures. Climate change pushed it there. Warmer global temperatures gave the fungus just enough evolutionary runway to make the jump from insects to us. And where does this newly upgraded nightmare take root? One of the world's largest flour and grain factories in Jakarta, Indonesia. Not a weapons lab, a flour mill. Workers start acting strange, biting people, displaying extreme aggression. The Indonesian military secretly brings in the country's top mycologist, Ratna Pertiwi, to examine an infected cadaver. She takes one look at the tendrils growing out of this woman's mouth and gives her professional recommendation: bomb the city. There is no cure. There is no vaccine. The only option is fire. Nobody bombs the city. By the time anyone processes what Ratna is telling them, 14 infected workers have vanished into the population, and the flour shipments have already left Jakarta. Containers full of contaminated grain, heading to bakeries, grocery stores, and food manufacturers on every continent. Every product that touches flour becomes a delivery system for the end of civilization. The incubation period when ingested is less than 24 hours. So millions of people eat contaminated food on roughly the same day, and millions of people turn on roughly the same day. September 26th, 2003. Outbreak Day. Not a slow burn from a single point. A simultaneous global ignition. Every major city, every small town with a grocery store, every household that bought a loaf of bread that week, all at once. This is what makes it the most terrifying vector on this list. You can avoid a lab, you can avoid chimps. You cannot avoid flour. It's in everything. It crosses every cultural boundary, every economic class, every geographic border. A subsistence farmer baking flatbread and a Wall Street banker eating a croissant are exposed through the exact same mechanism. And here's the detail that makes it genuinely brilliant as storytelling. In the pilot episode, Joel and his daughter Sarah dodge flour-based food all day without realizing it. They skip pancakes at breakfast. They forget to buy cake mix. They turn down biscuits from their elderly neighbors. Just a series of small, lucky non-choices that keep them alive while the world collapses around them. Which is, not ideal as a pun, but entirely accurate. The real negligence crystallizes in one moment. Ratna Pertiwi, the world's foremost expert on exactly this organism, tells military officials there is no solution except destruction, and they hesitate. They weigh politics and economics while contaminated flour trucks roll toward shipping ports. By the time anyone with a bomb makes a decision, the decision no longer matters. The flour is already in your kitchen, but if you think a fungus hiding in your morning toast is disturbing, wait until you hear about a virus so thorough it infected every human being on Earth before anyone even knew it existed, creating the wildfire virus. Here's the thing about every other outbreak on this list. Someone can point to a moment, a cage being opened, a drum being kicked, a bag of flour leaving a factory. There's a person, a place, a decision. With The Walking Dead, there's nothing. No moment, no origin, no patient zero. Just a virus so impossibly effective that by the time anyone noticed something was wrong, it had already won. The CDC internally designated the pathogen as wildfire. It's a viral disease that resurrects its host after death, reactivating the brainstem and turning the body into a walker that attacks the living. Standard zombie fare on the surface. But here's where it gets complicated, because wildfire doesn't work the way you think it does. Every single person on Earth is already infected. By the time Rick Grimes wakes up in that hospital, the virus has already completed total species coverage. Every man, woman, and child on the planet is carrying it. You don't catch wildfire from a bite. You already have it. You've always had it. Death is the trigger. Any death. Heart attack, car accident, old age, choking on a pretzel. You die, your brainstem lights back up, and you start biting people. So what do bites actually do? They deliver a massive secondary bacterial infection. The fever and sepsis kill you within days. And then the virus that was already inside you does its thing. The bite doesn't infect you with the zombie plague. It just kills you faster so the plague can activate. Dr. Edwin Jenner at the CDC showed this to Rick's group firsthand. Brain scans of his own wife. The virus kills, the brain goes dark, and then the brainstem flickers back online like someone flipping a light switch in an empty house. He confirmed universal infection. He confirmed there was no cure. What he did not confirm is where it came from, and that's not an oversight. That's the point. Robert Kirkman has stated that explaining the origin would diminish the story. The mystery is architectural. It's load-bearing. Remove it, and the existential dread collapses. But think about what the virus's behavior implies. It achieved complete global saturation before producing a single visible symptom. Every human on Earth became a carrier without coughing, without fever, without any detectable sign. That means either this is a natural pathogen with transmission so absurdly efficient it makes measles look like a lazy weekend project, or someone created something and released it so thoroughly that the details were lost to the collapse that followed. There is no containment option. There never was. By the time the first walker stood up, containing wildfire was like trying to contain oxygen. The only thing left was damage control, and even that was barely possible once the dead started outnumbering the living. This is the conceptual apex of every outbreak mistake on this list. Not a single bad decision, but the total absence of any opportunity to make a good one. A pathogen so perfectly designed for silent spread that it infected the entire human species before producing a single epidemiological signal. No alarm was possible because there was nothing to detect. Death itself became the enemy. Not walkers, not bites. Death, the one thing no civilization can prevent forever, which is, not ideal. But if you think a virus with no known origin and no possible cure represents the worst negligence in zombie fiction, wait until you hear about the outbreak that started with something as mundane as a hamburger. Harvesting the mad cow meat. Every other entry on this list has a face. A scientist who ignored a warning, an activist who opened a cage, a foreman who kicked a drum, something you can point at and say, that person, that moment, that's where it all went wrong. This one doesn't have that, and that's exactly what makes it the worst. In Zombieland, the zombie apocalypse traces back to something painfully ordinary, a mutated strain of mad cow disease that jumped to humans through contaminated beef. Not a secret lab, not a military experiment, just a burger, just Tuesday. Here's the thing, the real-world version of this already happened, minus the zombification. BSE emerged because the livestock industry decided to feed cattle the ground-up remains of other cattle, herbivores, eating themselves. Someone in a boardroom crunched the numbers on protein costs and said, yeah, that works. And decades later, people were dying of variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is, not ideal. Fiction just takes that genuine agricultural failure and asks one question. What if the prion mutated into something faster? And the negligence isn't a single moment you can freeze frame. It's thousands of decisions happening simultaneously across an entire supply chain. Feed manufacturers cutting costs with high-risk animal proteins. Regulators rubber-stamping inspections they never performed. Ranchers noticing cattle acting strange and shipping them to slaughter anyway because a sick cow is still worth money if nobody tests it. Slaughterhouses processing symptomatic animals right alongside healthy ones. Nobody stopping the line. Nobody asking questions. Because questions cost money and answers cost more. But here's where it gets genuinely terrifying. Prions aren't alive. They're misfolded proteins. You can't kill something that was never living in the first place. They survive cooking temperatures that would destroy any virus or bacteria. They resist standard sterilization. They persist in soil for years. So even if you identified contaminated beef tomorrow, every kitchen that ever prepared it, every grill, every cutting board, is potentially still dangerous. You can't boil this away. In a viral zombie outbreak, you can theoretically develop a vaccine, quarantine the infected, burn the bodies. With a prion-based outbreak distributed through the global beef supply, by the time the first person turns, millions have already eaten. The incubation period is the weapon. People are walking around with the thing already folded wrong inside their brains, and nobody knows. This is the endpoint of the negligence scale. Cain leaned into the egg. The activists opened the cage. Frank kicked the drum. Those are dramatic failures, but they're failures of individuals. Mad cow meat isn't a failure of individuals. It's a failure of a system so optimized for profit that no single person within it can see the full picture. The feed manufacturer isn't trying to end the world. The rancher isn't trying to end the world. The regulator isn't trying to end the world. They're all just trying to get through their quarter without losing money. And collectively, through sheer institutional inertia and 1,000 small compromises, they transform supply chain economics into an existential threat. The scariest monsters in fiction aren't the ones lurking in alien eggs or military drums. They're the ones already on your plate, invisible, unremarkable, and served with fries. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.